Welcome to Campfire, a gathering place for storytelling and courageous conversation. Here, we explore the big topics of life through the lens of growth and transformation towards wholeness. I'm Lara Greenaway, and I'm part of the research and development team at NCD Life. And I'm here today with Adam Johnstone, who is the executive director of NCD Life. How are you today, Dad?
I'm very well. Very well, thank you. Looking forward to this.
Yes, so am I. So we've spent the last few weeks talking about the topic of discipleship and what that means in the context of church. So today I thought it would be cool to talk about kind of another big theme that we see talked about in church, and that is evangelism. What is evangelism? How have we gotten it wrong? How does it interplay with discipleship? What does it mean? What does it look like for the average person to be evangelizing? So we're going to explore all of these topics today, but I thought that a good question to start with would be, in your experience, so you've been coaching churches in all different denominations across the world for 20 years, more than 20 years. So how would you say the average church kind of views evangelism or tries to live out evangelism in their context?
Yeah, great question. And as is so often the case in these questions, the words contained in the question contain incredible secrets to understanding how these things look. And clearly there's great passion for evangelism in many parts of the church, some parts much more so than others. That's why we have evangelical churches and sometimes other churches. So there's definitely, passion and I see in many places even a resurgence and zeal and an energy around that, which is just so encouraging. But when we talk about the topic of evangelism, the very first thing we have to understand is that the term evangelism does not appear in the Bible. So the concept of evangelism, that is an ism, the process of evangelizing, it's not actually a thing. And this is the case with so many aspects of things we look at from Christianity, especially from the Western kind of mindset that loves to put things in boxes, loves to rigorously define things, institutionalize them and put them in place. So then we can deliver on that thing. We can start it, we can finish it. We know we've done the thing we must do. We've been faithful in some sense. But to realize that there is no evangelism, there is no thing such as that, biblically speaking, is highly instructive, and it's very helpful to understand, particularly in the West, the way we go about it and why we end up in such a program-oriented approach where evangelism is about techniques and establishing programs. But in reality, that approach defies the biblical understanding that requires, incredibly intense attention to the person you're evangelizing, and also a very close attention to yourself as you continue to be evangelized. So that's just one piece of a challenge that we have to deal with, and things we make assumptions about as we engage. We say, oh, this is a biblical thing. It's like, yes, but we don't understand the process of evangelism because we're mistaken in part by the idea that there is a specific generic activity we can engage in. And that's part of what we have to solve in the church today moving forward.
Okay, so that's really interesting to me. I was going to ask actually about that, which is, did Jesus ever tell his disciples to evangelize? I mean, you've kind of answered the question a little bit there, but where do you think this concept of evangelism came from then? And what was it meant to be at its core that's then been kind of distorted as time has passed?
Well, I mean, there's no question that evangelism and the evangel, the good news, is an incredibly integral part of the New Testament. The means we go about it is, and what we understand it as, and the way we live it out is where the challenges emerge. And even in the context of our discussions, the idea of discipleship and evangelism being much more integrated than we typically understand is important. So even if Jesus says, gives the Great Commission, go make disciples of all nations, you could have a danger to say, he's talking about discipleship there. But when you understand the integration of evangelism and discipleship, you could hear it as essentially the same thing. Go share the good news and allow it to have its effect as part of you making disciples of people. And so, Jesus is ultimately the good news. But even the idea of the evangel itself, like what is the evangel? What is the good news? Is a highly problematic thing in much of Christianity. And thankfully, there's been a lot of scholars speaking into this, particularly in recent times, because if you say, what is the good news? Many people would say, Jesus died for your sins. And say, that's great. And I'm really, really happy about that. But the idea that the good news, the greatest news imaginable, would be voiced in terms of my personal benefit, it should be a little bit of a cause for question marks straight away.
Mm.
And so to understand it more appropriately, the good news is that Jesus is king. Jesus is the empowering king of all creation. Like that's the greatest news. That's what's revealed through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And that's then what is carried. So that's, if you're going to spread the good news at the highest level, it is that Jesus is king. And say, that's terrific. What are the implications of that? Glad you asked. Well, one of those implications is that, he lived and died and rose again, to address sin in your life. Wow, that's amazing. And you could go on with other things. And so in terms of Jesus wanting his disciples to evangelize, in essence, for them to carry the news of who he is and make disciples of that king is absolutely intrinsic to the idea of him encouraging them to evangelize, because he is the subject of the evangel. He is the centerpiece of the evangel. So in as much as they carry him and reflect him and bring him, then they are bringing the good news.
So is there any real difference between discipleship and evangelism? As in, are they different? I think most people probably conceptualize those two things as, you meet someone who's not a Christian, you evangelize them, share the good news with them about Jesus, and then they convert at some point, and then you begin discipling them. I think that's probably a pretty standard understanding of the process of those things happening. But what you're describing seems like it's a lot more intertwined. So, is there a real difference, and how does that actually work together?
Yeah, well, there is a difference, but it's the interdependency of the parts help us to understand the difference, because the way you just laid it out then is very helpful as a starting point to try to understand it better. This idea on a timeline, a person is evangelized for a period of time, they make a decision for Christ, and then they're discipled. And if you presented that to many people, they'd say, yes, that seems to make some sense. But the funny thing is, you don't have to push on that very hard to see it start to fall apart, because the first most interesting part is that Jesus' own disciples were disciples before they made their larger declarations for him. So discipleship, in a sense, came before the big statements and their major turns of heart and those sorts of things in the process. So already the order is out of sync. But if you take it further and you say, in that conventional picture, the idea is evangelism is for the unsaved. But if the evangelizing process is the good newsing of people, and that's the way you can think of it, it's the good newsing of people as the Spirit, that Jesus said, I will send the Spirit will convict the world of its sin. So the Spirit, amongst many other things that Spirit does, is in a way, I want to say it carefully, is almost bad newsing. Like, let me whisper in your ear and help you understand the way that you're trapped in the darkness in your life. As that's happening, and then as we participate with the Spirit and we are good newsing, here's the good news about the bad news. You can be set free. All of those sorts of things are woven into it. if that's the case, then that ongoing process clearly applies to all of us, even those who've made a decision for Christ. So evangelism continues after this, whatever this moment in time people would think of. So therefore, if they both exist, both sides of the timeline, you have to look for another way to work out how they relate to each other, because that conventional line, it doesn't make any sense. But as with happens in many things in natural church development, if you can't work out the relationship of two things, how they fit together, the very best thing you should do, as happens in nature and all of God's creation, see how they might fit together in a cycle. Like, is there a cyclical, ongoing, rhythmical relationship? And as soon as you do that, so many things fall into place, and you end up with, I guess, what I would call evangelized discipleship. And it's where you recognize discipleship cannot be fully achieved without evangelism, and evangelism cannot be fully achieved without discipleship, because they are absolutely intertwined every day of a person's life if they are in any way trying to align themselves with Jesus and the kingdom. So that's an attempt to answer your question anyway, but there's very definitely a strong connection. And I mean, we can elaborate on that, because it's, once you put that together, there's amazing things that start to click.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what does that look like? You know, you have a friend who doesn't really know Jesus and what most people would think of them as unsaved or unevangelized or that kind of thing. What would a more natural picture of an evangelized discipleship kind of cycle look like in the context of interacting with a friend like that?
Yeah, very practical. I guess one of the first points to look at is that the evangelism programmatic entity mindset pushes you towards the thought of, I need to have techniques in hand and certain answers to have for this friend that I must bring to that conversation. So straight away, like, I'm not questioning motivations whatsoever, but straight away, it's a perilous situation. The idea of coming along and saying, let's assume that Jesus was telling the truth, and this scandalous thing he said to his disciples, it's better for you that I go. It's like, oh, can't wait to hear what comes next. I'm here with the King of the universe, and he's telling me it's better that I go. Why? Because I'll send the Holy Spirit who will convict the world of its sins, and the way it's missing the mark, and what's not going right in their lives. So if you approach that friend with the trust that the Spirit of God has already started that conversation, has already started whispering. There are things where that person's already beginning to notice certain things just don't seem right, or I'm not quite fulfilled, or I feel certain darkness or moments that are challenging. Then that means automatically you would approach that conversation attentively observing your friend and asking questions. I mean, asking questions is one of the most attentive things you can do, and exploring things. How have you been feeling? And what did that make you think? And what are you exploring? Because you're then partnering with the Spirit in that moment, and you are engaging in the process that has already begun. It's not beginning with you. It already began with the work of the Spirit. And so when you have that engagement, you begin to understand that evangelism starts with this grace. And here's, so to piece the things together, and maybe we can throw up a picture as part of the podcast. But if you kind of take this picture that in John 1, it says, Jesus came full of truth and grace. Now, you can read that and say, oh, that sounds lovely. What a wonderful person, came full of truth and grace. And totally miss that the idea of a person being full of truth and grace is completely mind-boggling, when the fault line between truth and grace has pretty much been the main breakage point for the whole of Christianity. Like, every split in Christianity, more or less, has been somewhere on the fault line of truth and grace. So the idea that Jesus came full of truth and grace, somehow integrating the two of them, is incredible. And you say, all right, I need to know who this person is, and I want to be like this person, and I want my friend to meet this person and become like that person as well. So the grace of God arrives in the person's life, starts whispering, starts to help them to see things about their life. You come along and you take them from that grace point, and born out of that grace, you engage in evangelizing the person, bringing the good news to that person out of that grace. And that evangelizing born of grace leads to increased truth in their life. So suddenly I'm seeing the darkness, but I'm starting to hear what the answer may be, what the light may be. And my friend is starting to help me in ways. Maybe it's overtly talking about Jesus, but more times than not, it's probably talking about the way of true life, how life works, and giving them some wise counsel about how they may be able to move forward. And the Spirit's working through this so that you move from grace to a new level of truth in your friend's life. So evangelism is almost I called it like a diagnostic side of this cycle where you born of grace, you move to truth, and you move to a higher level of truth about your life, both about the darkness, but about the light that can be yours and the healing you can experience for whatever that little thing might be. And then the discipleship part completes the cycle, because out of that truth that's becoming real in your friend's life, they're starting to see a little bit more. Then they have opportunity to respond. And then if evangelizing is like the diagnostic part of that process, helping them see the gap between their life and what it could be, then discipling is the remedial side of the process, where you begin engaging in disciplines that would help you to deepen the experience of grace you have flowing into your life. And so then to have that conversation, help your friends see some truth, and then to walk with them in identifying, well, what simple disciplines would help you align a little bit more with the truth being revealed in your life. And that process of discipline along the way is where God is able to pour more grace into your life. You're not earning it, you're just aligning with the way of true life in your experience. And so that's one little mini cycle. That cycle might have been a 3-minute conversation. It might have been a day. It might have been something or other. But that you have taken them up a spiral on the journey to life, towards life in all its fullness, and you've walked with them in that way. Have they fallen to their knees? Have they cried? Have they whatever else? Uh, Perhaps not. But that's part of what we have to deal with. And you alluded to it before, this moment in time conversion stuff as well. But
Yeah, that certainly seems less clumsy than the average picture of evangelism. I was going to ask you about that, which is it's funny. I've felt like I've experienced this. I even remember as a kid feeling like um I felt this real sense of guilt that I hadn't, and I'm talking like 8 years old, this real sense of
mm,
guilt that I hadn't talked to my friends about who Jesus was, because it's going to be my fault that they, haven't been saved, and all this terrible stuff is going to happen to them. And I feel like a lot of people carry that.
hmm
Either there's really direct messaging from, maybe the church that they're a part of, like, this is your duty, you need to go out into the world, you need to evangelize. Or maybe it's not talked about as explicitly, but there's this feeling of, am I doing my job, am I doing what I'm
mm,
meant to be doing? But I also experience, and I'm sure that there's lots of people that have experienced this as well, this feeling of comfortability at the thought of, oh my gosh, I have to like go out and like, that's so awkward. Like, I would
mm,
never talk
mm,
to another person in that way, where I'd go up to them and be like, you need to hear about Jesus. Uh, and then also it can feel quite uncomfortable as the other person too. I think that there are probably people, there are people out there, and there are people that I know that are able to talk about the truth or the good news in a way that's really quite organic and doesn't feel like, putting on this sort of show to try and get you to convert, but just feels like a part of them. But
mm, mm.
do you think that us thinking of evangelism as having to be this like point in time, they fall to their knees, they start praying, that kind of thing, has sort of set us back in actually being able to talk about the good news with other
mm.
people?
Yeah, yeah. You're going to a very, very deep issue here and an unbelievably important one in the mix of things. Because if you're talking about the evangelized discipleship process, the natural rhythm of truth and grace in a journey, and once you look at it, you say, yes, that seems to be how things work. The necessary question is, okay, but where's the decision? Where's the big decision there? Because there's huge implications around this, this moment of decision, both for a person engaging with a friend, but for your own journey. The reality is most people on the Christian journey have difficulty pointing to that moment, that singular moment in time. If most people, that's not the case. Many people can point to an incredibly significant moment in time. And so, and that is more than valid. It's profound. Like it was a life-changing thing, their experience. So for our own experiences, there's something very different there that needs to be understood. And if you, even on that side, if you haven't and can't recall this very significant moment, then you can to some degree feel like a second-class spiritual citizen in some way, because that didn't really happen. And maybe that's what's missing from my journey. And so maybe I'll seek after that bigger experience that will happen. So there's a huge problem there. But on the other side, if you have had a significant experience, then countless times you have the situation that after that experience, you find yourself drifting, you're going in directions, you feel like you're going backwards, you've still got certain sin patterns in your life, all these sorts of things. And then you're doubting, what happened then? Because I had the experience, I said the prayer, I did all that, what's actually going on now? So that's an unbelievable burden to carry if in fact this singular moment thing is the case. But then if we flip it to your question, that's the other side of it. What if I'm the person trying to lead a person to that moment? And I'm in the same boat as you. I've been involved in Christian work for decades, but I look around and compared to people I know, the number of people I've led to Christ in momentary decision terms, you count on one hand, even less than a hand, perhaps. Like it's very, very small. And that's a thing that plagues me to some extent. And so the danger there is that if that's not happening, then I'm clearly not evangelizing. I'm not bringing people to Jesus, the sorts of things, you're referring to. But equally, there's a danger if a person is managing to do that, but they're oblivious to the fact that, yes, someone came and there was a significant moment, but you kind of left them at the altar. Like, what happened after that? Because their life has not been able to maintain that. So all of this orients around this thing about the moment in time. And here's the kicker around this. Nowhere in the New Testament is there a noun or proper term that in any way directly relates to the idea of a conversion to Christ or a moment of conversion. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, wow.
And the thing is, if you look at the word family to do with repent and these sorts of things, you have a number of different terms that relate to it, but probably two of the biggies is like repent in terms of metanoia, change your mind, and epistropho, turn around or return. When you take something like metanoia, overwhelmingly, the tense of that term, so to change your mind, to see differently, to turn around in some sense, if you combine the two, overwhelmingly, the tense used in the New Testament is a present imperative tense. So it's not a singular event. So when you read about repent in the Bible, our Western eye is just, yes, there's a thing you do, you've now repented, now you get on with things. It's not in the text. It's simply not there. It's always conveying the idea of a continuous process. It's similar to Paul's, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, the sense of ongoing process. So everywhere you turn, the evangelism as an event-based oriented thing, discipleship as a program-based thing, neither exists in the New Testament. It all sits within the context of the process, an ongoing process taking place. And so what does this mean for the event thing? There's no denying that you would have had them, I've had them, even if it's not sensed as my conversion event, so to speak. many people have had these very significant events they can think of on the journey, and they're absolutely legitimate. But the critical thing to understand is that that journey is actually made up of thousands of events, thousands of decisions, and most importantly, thousands of turnings that take place.
Mm,
So you could say, here's this moment a person made a decision, said a prayer, did something like that. But what's missing there is, what were the countless decisions that led up to that, the kind of masked ones that were all equally metanoia moments, epistrophe moments,
mm,
turning your mind. Think of it this way, like if I'm walking in this direction and Jesus is back behind me and he's calling out to me, I'm walking away from him. My life is in the other direction. But the Spirit or something is said and it catches me and it just convicts me slightly. And I just turn my head, I turn my ear slightly. I'm orienting just that fraction. I'm having a metanoia moment that is literally rewiring pathways in my brain. And I may turn and then I may take a slightly different direction. I'm even still broadly walking away from Jesus, but there's been a turning. And then down the path, there might be another event and there's a slight turning. And at a certain point, the turnings are meaning you've eventually turned much more. In the most part, you are in the direction of Jesus. And maybe you could say that's broadly where the bigger changes happened. But it misses the point if it's not seen that there are these constant moments of transformation happening. And so we really have to call out, I'd almost call it decisionism. Like you could call it decisionism, which is this mindset that the whole journey is evangelize, there's a critical moment, and then you disciple. And because the damage done by that mindset is profound, both to those experiencing it and those trying to walk with their friends. If that non-biblical, non-process, non-journey, non-attentive to the person approach is being undertaken, there is damage being done and there is a dramatic loss of fruit in those beautiful, simple, natural moments that Jesus displayed over and over and over. The turning moments and events that happened. It wasn't like every conversation he had, suddenly the person fell to their knees and say, oh, Jesus is Lord. Like it wasn't anything like that, but you knew there were turning points happening along the way.
yeah. And that I was gonna yeah, sorry, my brain's going
It's a
off in
lot.
100
It's a lot.
directions. It's a lot. Yeah. I was gonna ask, it's interesting because I think a lot of people also, when they hear like evangelists and, people will typecast people
Mm, mm,
as an evangelist type or that sort of thing. Um, and you often think of like these really big like rallies or conferences or that sort of thing where there's this, main evangelical pastor or something like that. And there's thousands of people and you can even look up such and such is responsible for this many thousands of people
mm,
giving their
mm,
life to Christ. What
mm.
what do you make of things like that? I mean, you've
Yeah.
already talked a little bit about that, about, people do have genuine moments where there's, a big event that they can point to where they go, that was a significant moment for me where I had I guess you could say, a larger degree of a turning around.
Mm,
Um, but what do you make of that, particularly when we talk about the interplay of discipleship and evangelism and the cycle and the need for sort of the ongoing truth and grace playing out?
mm,
How
mm.
does that work or not work in a context where you've got a large conference, you go to this thing, you're like, oh my goodness, my life has been changed. And
Mhm.
then you sort of continue on with your life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess there's a number of things there. I'll attempt to circle around them, but there's no question. The New Testament speaks of the evangelists many times and refers to this tendency, and certainly from our research, broadly speaking, you could say that 10% of people have a heightened gift of evangelism. Now, again, in our NCD teaching, we're very careful to indicate a non-mechanistic understanding of giftedness. It's not like, you have this gift and you have nothing of it. It's a nonsense that all gifts exist on a continuum, and you have giftedness that represents what you should spend most of your time doing. But alongside every gift, there's a sense of a universal Christian responsibility. So everyone has a part to play in this evangelistic, evangelized discipleship process. And but there are people who are more gifted in evangelism, and probably the Billy Grahams and the Crusade, things like that. Clearly, that's correct to view people in that sense. But if you then say, well, what is the evangelist then? And one way you can think of it is that there are people who are particularly gifted at drawing those metanoia, repent, decision threads together from a person's life into a cohesive whole and joining that with the bigger picture message of the gospel. People definitely who are very gifted to sort of do that. I'm not so much. I'll maybe get drawn into the weeds and the details and stuff. And now I feel liberated because I know that I'm playing a part in evangelism. But these other people seem to have a significant part to play. Now, the funny thing is that there's a sort of in many places, there can tend to be a little bit of an animosity between almost personality types or something between these parts, because those who are not the high gifted evangelists can feel a bit intimidated or put off or whatever else by them. It's a very real thing. You know that, I know that. But then also the classic evangelist, and I'm talking about where it's not all working as it should work, the classic gifted evangelists, they don't necessarily play well with others. And so they have a particular part and they can project very strongly the importance of their particular part of the process, and it's all leading to that, or it's all following from that. Again, this decisionism thing. But when it works properly and those people are able to, be in a conversation, and you've been walking that road, like you said, with your friend, and they've been going through hundreds of little metanoia moments, and you've been walking with them. They've been genuinely getting evangelized, being discipled, and their life is beginning to come into the rhythm of truth and grace under Jesus. But then maybe you have this friend who can kind of join that together, and then you have dinner together, and that might be the moment that your friend goes, I see it now. I see all of that. And that's how it should be. But then it requires those who are not the high gifted evangelists to say, I need those people. And I'm glad I have a friendship with one who can kind of help bring that clarity to my friend on the journey. And hopefully the evangelist people say, wow, I've got nothing. So Billy Graham is there. And importantly, how many millions upon millions of many metanoia moments were happening through the lives of countless people as they came towards and eventually, partook in one of these kind of crusades or something or other. And so recognizing that is critically important. And then that's the body working together well. So nothing I'm talking about in any way, I don't want to take anything away from the significance of the events and the moments. I just want to recognize that there are enormously more moments than we usually recognize. Some are higher, some are lower, but the high ones are only possible in many instances if there have been countless smaller ones that created the space for these larger jump up the spiral sort of moments.
That's so true. I feel like, yeah, I'm interested because I'm like, how many people actually do full 180s in one moment? I think we perceive a lot of people as being like, well, and I'm sure there are. I mean, Paul's a great example. It's like, that was a pretty big 180, Saul to Paul.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I feel like sometimes we underestimate that person's already had those, as you said, the turning their head, the starting to move the body, that by the time there's something like, let's say they go to one of those conferences or they, have that interaction with that person, that they were already starting to turn, and then it's like, oh yeah, okay.
Yes. Yeah. Let's unpack that specifically. Let's go to Paul, and I'd also like to go to Peter, because we sometimes talk about the 180. But if you think, and again, to think spatially about these things is very valuable. Again, as Western thinkers, we're linear, we're books. The top word starts here, the bottom word starts there. It's all in a line. We don't think spatially, and yet the spatial understanding of things is throughout the Bible, everywhere. It contains. So you're talking about a person had a 180. So they're pointing that direction, now they're pointing that direction. I'd prefer to say that in Paul's case, we can absolutely say Paul had at least a 91. Because what that means is if Paul turned by at least 91 degrees, then he was more for Jesus than against. We can forget we read the Bible and it's almost like Paul had this incredible encounter with Jesus and he lost his sight and it was restored. And then 2 pages later, he's on missionary journeys. We forget that there were years in between where
Yeah,
there's
so
no
true.
record of what's happening. And N.T. Wright's written some brilliant biographical stuff around this for us to try to at least kind of imagine probably what's happening in that space. So how thorough was his turnaround? Well, you'd have to say it wasn't a 180 in the sense of suddenly his life is now completely aligned with Jesus. Like the evidence is clear. He himself recognized through the chronology of his writing, I am Paul an apostle. And then over time, his awareness, I'm Paul, the least of the apostles, like his self-awareness changed over time. So there was metanoia continuing to happen in Paul's own life as he went. So what happened on that road? As one of the most significant documented moments in Christian history, I'd like to say there was at least, probably more than 91-degree turn, but there was at least a 91-degree turn, which meant that his inclination and posture was unquestionably towards Jesus. Was he perfectly aligned? Of course he wasn't perfectly aligned. There was still more conversion, more metanoia to happen. And he needed people walking with him on that road. But Peter's maybe even more interesting because poor old Peter, he's one of the most documented and exposed disciples in all of history and all of his foibles and things about there. But you say, at the boat, come, I'll make you fishers of men. There's a really significant thing that happened in that moment. But then there is, the rebuke from Jesus, get behind me, Satan. And then there's the prediction of the denial. Then there's the denial itself. And so poor Peter's spinning, his compass is flipping about all over the place. Probably in all instances was still at least pointing in half a circle towards Jesus, but flipping all over the place. And then even after his restoration by the seashore, after the resurrection, even after that, he then had the revelation of the inclusion of the Gentiles in the ministry. So these things that had to continue to happen on his journey. So you say, what was the moment of Peter's conversion? And you then feel forced to answer the question, and you shouldn't be forced to answer the question because it's not even a biblical question. When you understand the process of epistropho metanoia, the cycle of truth and grace, evangelized discipleship, continuing to happen in the life of someone like Peter, and far better we point our attention to how do we live like Peter as a disciple of Jesus, and how do we make sure that we are continuing to be evangelized, have our mind changed, and continuing to put in place the disciplines that would help us live that way.
Yeah, I'd be so interested to know if other cultures have this same hang-ups around the moments of time and feeling like you have to be able to point to a specific point in time. I mean, it feels so Western of us to be even needing to grade things we need to know that this child in this point of time where they sit, and are they an A student or are they a that feels like a very Western sort of mentality to have to be able to put a label on things or box things instead of viewing it as the overall process.
Yes.
I know that for me, as you mentioned earlier, I always felt really uncomfortable with the idea of evangelizing, and it was something that I thought I actually can't think of nearly anything that I would hate more, if I'm honest. And I would just feel like, oh gosh, that feels horrible. But I think recently I've had some metanoia moments as it relates to evangelism, in understanding what it actually could mean for me. And definitely a part of it, I do have to become more and more comfortable with being able to speak out the good news to people in a way that is compassionate and natural and kind of rehearsing that more. But, you know, something that always troubled me was seeing, and like I said, this is from my experience. I'm sure that there are a lot of churches that are like this, but there's also probably churches that do this a lot better. But I think something that always concerned me was when there's like a new person that walks into church that like they've, for whatever reason, like they're not Christian, but they decided to show up today and this is a new thing for them. It's like the excitement in the air and everyone wants to go over and talk to them. And there's this real, and as there should be, like there should be excitement over people becoming increasingly turned towards Jesus. But I found that disproportionately, there's all this excitement. And then as soon as you've showed up consecutively for a number of weeks, people kind of lose interest in you a little bit, or there's not, it's almost like, okay, the moment has happened, it's past, and now we park that. Unless you then stop showing up to church for a number of weeks in a row. And then it kind of all starts again. And then it's like, oh, hang on now. So I felt like I observed that. I mean, even for myself, if I would, you know, miss a week or two of going to church, I would find, wow, everyone's like talking to me when I'm coming back as like a, okay, and that sort of thing, which is lovely. But yeah, I think that's something that I found a little bit unsettling was we become quite complacent about the continuation of needing to experience both truth and grace and continue to be evangelized and continue to be discipled. But an experience that I had that sort of shifted my mindset was that somebody started coming to my church and this person had already had interactions with other people that had acquainted him with who Jesus was and made them be like, oh, hey, he seems like a cool person. This seems like someone that's worth following. Had already had an immense metanoia moment, even in terms of their lifestyle and the shifts that were happening there. But now they were in my church and they weren't going to church with those people that had helped to facilitate one of those metanoia moments. And it was easy for me to sort of think, oh, well, the work's already been done almost, and now it's maintenance mode or something like that. But there were moments where it was like, oh, in conversations with this person where I thought, now's actually a moment where truth needs to be explored. And in my growing comfortability with, okay, this is actually something that I can do, and I'm, you know, friends with this person. I've sort of built up a relationship with them. And so I'm going to speak into this thing that they're currently experiencing or kind of prod on something or test it. And what was really interesting is that, as you said, the Spirit, having confidence that the Spirit's actually already at work, being like, hey, unsettling them when they're not aligned. And that was definitely happening. I could sense that there was already this unsettling. And so I think having experiences like that, I sort of started to be like, oh, okay, evangelism happens in those moments as well. And maybe that's actually completely a reasonable thing to think, oh, I am actually assisting in that process, not just because I found someone on the street and I'm the reason that they came to church this week, but because I'm continuing to help the metanoia process happen.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot in that. And I think, you know, it's so interesting. The more I come to understand this evangelized discipleship, the more I could look at it and say, knowing you are involved in so much of that. I would say probably much more than most Christians, even though you wouldn't see it that way. And then for me, the same thing applies. I suddenly realized, no, I'm not this second-class spiritual citizen, not engaged in it. In fact, enormous amounts of my life are about creating metanoia moments for people on the road. I mean, we're making this podcast in part as a process of evangelized discipleship, hoping that things we're talking about here will be bringing about those moments. So there's so much in that. And I think, the example you gave with the person coming to the church, if you stretch that further, the excitement, here's a new person here. Now, of course, not all churches welcome new people particularly well, but then that's indicative that they're just not really focused on any of that part of the journey, or they're more comfortable just being their own crew. But if people are coming there and you extend it out in the church that may get excited about it, you know that in many cases, if that person then said, if they're already Christian, said, I've decided to make this my church. It's like, wow, there was that moment, that's in our psyche. That's part of this climactic moment that we're hoping for. And isn't that incredible? And then we would share that good news. Now, is it good news? Sure, it's great, but it's disproportionately focused compared to the overall picture. Or maybe that person that came was a non-Christian, and then, the huge thing, now they've made a public declaration for Christ. It's like, yes, that's an incredible thing to make that public declaration. But the danger is in not recognizing what came before it and also what must follow that in that ongoing continuous process. And so it's understandable that there is much more attention paid to a person if they look like they're somewhere near what we have defined as the moment. But then beyond that, as we've talked about in the previous podcast, the average Christian goes backwards spiritually the longer they're part of a local church. Why? Because, well, we're not that interested in them now because the big moment happened. The rest of it is just ride it out until Jesus comes back, So it's a real problem that exists there. And so it's not to take away from the moment. None of this is about that, but it's to elevate the value of all of the other moments and pay attention in those moments and to continue to pay attention along the way. That's just such a critical thing. And just to comment about what you're saying about the different cultures, the Western culture, you can think of in these terms in very broad categories. Western type culture is noun-based culture. Eastern culture is like verb-based culture. Southern culture, African, indigenous South American to some extent, is like adjectival culture. So, like literally in some African languages, there's no word for green. It's like grass. It's like, why would you abstract something from its beauty, existence, and purpose? It's just grass. That's what it is. That's what we mean. And so that is adjectival sense. And in Eastern cultures, the flow, the movement is more important. Whereas in the Western thing, the institutionalizing and putting things in boxes. So it's no wonder that we have such an event-based mindset that reads beyond what the Bible itself actually presents. And perhaps tying that together, if we think about evangelism, or evangelized discipleship, tie it together. The greatest evangelized discipling person ever was, of course, Jesus himself. And so if you look at the nature of the conversations that he had, and you said, is this person, that someone is healed and then they walk away saying, oh, they're now a Christian. Probably more than they were before, but we're overreading if we project onto that some idea, like as if that was the conversion experience. And the important thing is that Jesus was really cool with that because he understood the nature of the progressive transformational process and that he could do the best that is possible in that moment by paying incredible attention to the person in front of them and make sure that they're moving somewhere in that journey if they are open to that movement. So his own sober understanding of the process was evident, and he's the best one we should look to understand those dynamics.
I find that really interesting, the whole like process thing and the verb thing, which is also, I was listening to a different podcast a little while ago, which was talking about metabolic health. And the person that was on the podcast was saying, we, like most people think of their bodies as things that do things. Like I am a person that goes around and does things, but
Yes.
that it's actually far more accurate to think of yourself as a process or a series of processes, even if you look at the way that we're made and how each part of our body functions, even our cells turning over, it's far more a process than a thing, which is also, it's also quite hopeful, because it's the person that made our bodies is also the one that is teaching us how to interact with one another and bring us closer to turning towards Jesus, and thinking of that in that every single moment that you have the opportunity to turn yourself more and more in line with the way of true life is such a hopeful picture. Yeah, that was just a thought. I had another question for you, which is, most Christians think of evangelism as pointing people closer to the person of Jesus. But then you also have both people, but then also organizations, even like Christian organizations, that are focused on the evangelism of like lifestyle. So trying to help people, get clean, come off drugs, or, find housing after being homeless, or, from an individual level, helping my friend become healthier or more mindful, or help to mend their relationship in some way. And I wanted to ask, how do those two things interact with one another? Does the process of metanoia include both the becoming more acquainted with the person and the shifting of the lifestyle? And what happens if attention is only given to one thing?
Wow. You go some crazy places. That's, yeah. I think I'm inclined to go, as we've perhaps touched on before, again, back to John 1 and this profound statement, the Logos, the way of true life, became flesh and dwelt among us. And to understand that the way of true life didn't cease to be the way of true life when it became flesh and dwelt among us. So the transpersonal, inescapable reality of how the underlying kingdom of God functions that we live in and either align with and things get better, or we don't align with and things go badly, that continues to exist. And in the same way, the personification of that way of true life embodied by Jesus is a reality. And so what I would say is those two groups are legitimately evangelizing, bringing about metanoia moments with somewhere on the continuum towards either the king or the kingdom. And both are essential. If you only, and this happens a lot, let's introduce you to Jesus, help you understand, in a sense, abstractly who he is, how important he is, get you to make a decision for him. But then we fail to evangelize and disciple you into the ways of his kingdom, which is a big part of the Great Commission. Immerse them in the Trinitarian reality of existence itself. And if you fail to do that, having a king without a kingdom is of very limited use to you. But equally, having a kingdom without a king, knowing and learning the way of true life, but ultimately not having the personal relationship with the one who is the way of true life, is going to leave you short as well. It'll give you a general principles of how to live, and certainly some ministries, they don't claim to necessarily do much more than that. And it's of some help, but only in coming to that personal relationship do you then interconnect that with the idea that in every moment I can be guided by the Spirit of Jesus in every aspect of my life in accordance with the ways of his kingdom. And so I look forward to there being a much closer connection of those kinds of ministries over time. And I hope that the language of, king without a kingdom, kingdom without a king, helps them to understand whatever they're doing is limited. But absolutely in both cases, you see very clear examples, like parachurch groups doing lifestyle programs to help you know how to present yourself appropriately with a resume in order to try to get a job. Yes, we are helping you align with the way of true life, identifying your capacities, presenting them, communicating them, doing those things. They are ways of Jesus' kingdom, unquestionably, and we are going to change your mind to understand them, and we're going to give you disciplines that help you to actually live that out. Thoroughly legitimate, but incomplete. But just as incomplete as introducing people to the person of Jesus, but not discipling them and evangelizing them unto the ways of his kingdom, which is go make converts of all nations, blah, 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 something, instead of the actual Great Commission, which is, comprehensive in that regard.
This has been a really great conversation. I have a final question to send us off, and that is, what would you like the average person to take away from this conversation, whether relieving them of some guilt that they may have had, based off their understanding of what evangelism meant and what they were meant to be doing that maybe they were falling short of, or helping people to understand how to actually do what they're doing now, which is introducing people to Jesus and all of that kind of thing in a way that supports a person's long-term growth. If you were to, I know that's not a very easy, simplified question, but yeah, if you have any final thoughts as to just, advice on how a person should be thinking about evangelism and discipleship in, let's just say, in their personal circles. So the people that they're interacting with on a daily basis, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I think I would just say that the call of the New Testament and what Jesus calls us to is to walk with him, to walk with others, and pay close attention, and understand that genuine love is to pay attention to the other person and what they most need in a given moment. And that's the way Jesus wants to walk with us. That's the way he wants us to walk with others as well, and to understand that the big events along the way are not the cause, they're the fruit. Something may come, and that's in his hands. Something else will happen of a larger nature. But what we're called to unambiguously in the New Testament is the continuous moments of metanoia, of epistropho, of evangelizing, not evangelism, discipling, not discipleship. And that if we can shift our minds to that and notice the attentiveness Jesus applied, that will relieve incredible degrees of guilt, in part because you'll be paying attention to what actually matters. You'll be seeing it happening in front of you as you go. And so the guilt will be relieved. You'll be set free to actually do what will be most fruitful in the first place. And the words of Jesus again, abide in me. As you abide in me, you will bear increasing fruitfulness. That degree of attentive side-by-side walking relationship that we must do with others and that Jesus wants to do with us is the source to dramatically increased fruitfulness and solving all sorts of challenges, in the world around us. So I would hope that there was a greater desire out of this conversation for people to want to know how to do that. And some of our tools can help them clarify that as well. That's what we want to see happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation. And for those of you listening, as Dad mentioned, look, we have all kind of messed up our idea of what discipleship and evangelism means, and probably need some practice at being able to see clearly and know how to walk alongside one another. So, as always, our wholeness test is free to take, and I've attached the link in the description. And that is a great tool for yourself, as you've probably discovered from this conversation. What we've talked about means that you too need to continuously be evangelized and discipled. And that will help you to identify and get a more objective picture as to where you are walking with Jesus really well and what he delights in you, and then what is maybe troubling Jesus about your life and how you can continue to transform that. It's also a great tool to be able to invite your friends to take. It is written in a way that you can send it to your friends that don't yet know Jesus. If they were tripped up by taking something that has really overly spiritual language, this will not do that, because it's written in a way that it doesn't matter what your starting point is. You can take it and begin to experience that metanoia process. So we hope you'll make use of that tool. And until next time.